In this lesson, I'm going to help you improve your grammar for academic writing task 1. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be too complex. It just has to be useful and appropriate for accomplishing the task of describing and summarizing and comparing the data that you see in a table, graph, chart, or diagram. So let's get started. And let's begin with understanding exactly what's required when it comes to your grammatical range and accuracy in writing task 1. Again, you want to use grammar, forms, tenses, and structures that are useful and appropriate, not too complex and complicated. And if you have that high intermediate to advanced level of English that is necessary for success on the IELTS exam, these will be very familiar to you, and you'll be able to adapt them quite simply to writing task 1. First of all, let's talk about the tenses. Basically, depending on the type of graph or chart or diagram, you'll be using present, past, or future. If your graph or diagram doesn't have any dates and doesn't go from one time period to another, then you'll be using mostly present tense forms. If you have past dates on the graph or chart, then you'll be using the past tense. And if it contains future predictions or projections, then you'll want to be able to talk and use future forms. So we're going to have some examples of these as we go through. And I want to begin with the present tense. And one of the best things to do to have the right tone and appropriate language for writing task 1 is to be able to take the present tense and put it into passive. This gives it a little more formal tone. It doesn't have to be too formal, but this just adds to the way that you're describing what you see in your diagram or chart. And you can simply say something like, it can be seen that, or it is shown to, and you can use these two phrases. For example, it can be seen that there was an increase from 1990 to 2005 in the amount of air pollution, or air pollution is shown to increase over this period of time. So these are just some good uses of present passive when it comes to writing task 1. And one of the other things that will happen is using present passive, even though you're describing something that's in the past. And so we combine present passive with simple past. So if we were looking at a chart that described different topics in university, we could combine present passive, it can be seen that, and then we use simple past. It can be seen that history was the most popular. And this is a very common combination that you can use in writing task 1. And again, it's not overly complex or complicated. These are structures that you could and should be familiar with, and you just want to use them appropriately in writing task 1. So that's present passive and simple past. So you're just putting a little tweak on simple present by putting it into passive, and you're using simple past. And again, you can see it's not complicated or complex, something that's well within your level of confidence and your level of comfort when it comes to grammar. So let's just talk about simple past. If we're looking at a pie chart, for example, and we don't have dates, we could maybe say something like Cuba was the most popular destination. If we did have a date, then we just simply add that information. Cuba was the most popular destination in 1990. 90. So simple past is going to be a very common structure for describing dates and things that happened on your chart or diagram in the past. Another one is past perfect. And past perfect is used when we want to describe something that happened before something else in the past. So if there was an increase leading up to 2000, we could say by 2000, the population had increased. So this is simply using past perfect to describe something that happened before 2000. Another one that we can use is present perfect. And we often use present perfect when we want to connect the past with the present situation. So we are starting with talking about the present, this year. And then we describe what's taken place or what happened leading up to this year. This year, the amount has remained unchanged. So there wasn't any change leading up to this year. And so we'll just say the amount has remained unchanged. So we have simple past and past perfect, which describe things that happened in the past and give us a sense of order for the past. But when we want to connect the past to the present situation, that's when we use present perfect. And again, if you have that intermediate to advanced level of English, these verb tenses are going to be quite familiar to you, and you won't have to go out of your confidence zone, your comfort zone, to be able to use them effectively and appropriately in writing task 1. Let's talk about the future. And this is when you'll have a graph or a diagram that goes into the future and projects a date in the future. So if I were talking about 2025 and if 2025 was on my graph or chart, then I have to talk about something that's projected into the future. And when we're using future tenses in writing task 1, there are two things that we don't want to say. We don't want to say will, and we don't want to say going to. Okay. These are describing the future when we're certain and sure of something happening. And on a graph, even though it's shown on the graph, if it talks about the future, it's only a prediction or a projection. So we're going to use terms like expected to or projected to. Okay. So by 2025, the population is expected to increase dramatically. So don't use will or going to, use expected to or a similar term to that. And if you want to learn some specific terms and vocabulary when it comes to talking about the future in writing task 1, be sure to watch the lesson that accompanies this one, which is improving your vocabulary for writing task 1. These two lessons go hand in hand, and you'll find the link for the vocabulary lesson in the comments with this video. And I would encourage you to subscribe to the channel, where you can find lots more writing tips for task 1 and task 2. And as a matter of fact, you can find choose from over 100 videos to find everything you need to know about every section or every question type in the IELTS exam. So let's continue with moving from tenses to another aspect of grammar that's particularly important in writing task 2, and it's prepositions, these little words that make a big difference, and they're prepositions. So sometimes we'll be talking about a percentage. So we'll say the percentage of, or the figure for, or something started at, or began with. Or when we're talking about a date, a year, or a month, we might say in 2010. It's important to become very familiar with these prepositions, these little words that can make a big difference, because these word forms, there are words that require a specific preposition. And I would encourage you, if you are going to spend some time memorizing vocabulary, because basically that's how we learn prepositions. They're important for grammar, but we learn them like vocabulary. Certain prepositions go with certain words. So we always say percentage of, figure 4, started at, began with, in 2010. So I would encourage you to spend your time, if you need to brush up on prepositions, to do that so that you can use them effectively in writing task 1. Sometimes we want to use prepositions to describe changes. Something increased from 2000 to 2010. If we want to describe growth, we say grew by 10%, or an increase of 10%. Again, it's just important to know which preposition is associated with which type of term. And the good news is the terms that you're attaching these prepositions to are ones that you're very familiar with. So determine the forms and the terms that you want to use, the vocabulary you want to use, and just make sure that the preposition coincides and matches the term that you're using. If we want to describe time with prepositions, we can say after 1 year, over the 10-year period, or during 2010, or between 2000 and 2010. Again, these are very common prepositions. I'm sure you're very familiar with them. Just use them correctly and simply in writing task 1. And if we want to describe a trend, how something changed, we can say from 2000 until 2010. Let's just take a look at an example. And this example kind of shows different tenses and how passive and passive present and simple past can go together. It displays the use of some prepositions. But most of all, I just hope that it shows you how simply and straightforward using your grammar with the right combination of verb tenses and prepositions can actually be simple just by staying within your comfort zone. The words and phrases and grammar that you're confident with. And this is how you can get a higher score in writing task 1. The amount of air pollutants produced by transportation, passive, present, remained relatively stable. Again, now we're using the simple past, at approximately 1 ton from 1990 to 2005. So we're using the appropriate prepositions to describe a change. We just put it all together. And this is something that you can do with success if you keep it simple and focus on learning what's most appropriate and useful for writing task 1. Again, I want to encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Make sure you see the accompanying lesson with this, which is to improve your vocabulary for writing task 1. And I'm sure if you put these 2 lessons together, you'll have everything you need to get a good score in writing task 1.